The scream echoed through the vast emptiness of the Wyoming prairie, tearing through Theodora Jenkins' chest like a physical blow. One moment her 7-year-old brother Samuel had been chasing a rabbit through the tall grass, and the next he was gone, swallowed by the earth itself. The abandoned well, its wooden cover rotted through by years of harsh weather, had claimed him without warning on that sweltering summer day in 1876. "Samuel!" Theodora cried out, her voice breaking as she rushed to the jagged hole in the ground. She fell to her knees, dirt staining her calico dress as she peered down into the darkness. "Samuel, can you hear me?" A faint whimper floated up from below, followed by the sound of splashing.
"Thea, I'm scared."
His small voice echoed against the stone walls of the well. "I'm standing in water, and it's cold. Stay still, Sammy. Don't move." Theodora fought to keep her voice steady despite the panic threatening to overwhelm her. At 22, she had been caring for her younger brother since their parents died of fever 3 years prior. Their small homestead sat isolated on the Wyoming frontier, miles from the nearest neighbor. "My leg hurts, Thea," Samuel called up, his voice trembling. Theodora looked around desperately. Their nearest neighbors were the Thorntons, at least 5 miles away. She couldn't leave Samuel alone in the well, but she had no way to reach him. The rope at the well had frayed and broken months ago, and she hadn't yet replaced it. The sound of hoofbeats cut through her panic. A rider approached from the west, silhouetted against the setting sun. Theodora scrambled to her feet, waving her arms frantically. "Help! Please help!" she shouted, her honey-brown hair coming loose from its pins as she ran toward the approaching horse. The rider urged his mount faster, closing the distance between them. As he drew near, Theodora could make out a tall figure atop a magnificent chestnut stallion. The man wore a dust-covered duster, a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over his eyes, and a bandana around his neck. The setting sun caught the gleam of a silver star pinned to his vest. "What's happened, miss?" His deep voice carried across the prairie as he reined his horse to a stop. "My brother," Theodora gasped, pointing toward the well. "He's fallen down the old well. Please, he's only 7. The rider dismounted in one fluid motion, tying his horse to a nearby fence post. "Zachariah York, deputy marshal," he said, removing his hat to reveal sun-bronzed features and piercing blue eyes that stood out against his weathered skin. "Let's get your brother out of there." Theodora led him to the well, where he knelt and called down. "Hello there, son. What's your name?" "Samuel," came the frightened reply. "Well, Samuel, I'm Deputy York, but you can call me Zach. I'm going to get you out of there, but I need you to be brave for me."
"Can you do that?"
"Yes, sir," Samuel answered, his voice small but determined. Zach turned to Theodora. "What's your name, miss?" "Theodora Jenkins. Everyone calls me Thea." "Miss Jenkins, do you have any rope on your property?" "In the barn, but it's not very long." "Get it," he instructed, already shrugging out of his duster and unbuckling his gun belt. "And bring any blankets you can spare. The water down there will be cold." Theodora ran to the small barn behind their modest cabin, hands trembling as she gathered the coil of rope hanging from a nail. She hurried back to the house for blankets, her mind racing with prayers for her brother's safety. When she returned, Zach had removed his boots and was examining the circumference of the well. "How deep do you reckon it is?" he asked, taking the rope from her hands. "I don't know exactly. Maybe 20 feet to the water? My father dug it when we first settled here, but it dried up last year. There must be water in it now from the spring rains." Zach nodded, measuring the rope with his eyes. "It'll be enough to get down, but we'll need more to bring your brother up." He looked at her intently. "I'll need to fashion a harness. You have any leather straps or belts?" Theodora nodded. "Yes, in the house."
"Get them."
"And a lantern, too. The sun's setting fast." By the time Theodora returned with the requested items, Zach had stripped down to his shirt and trousers. He had fastened one end of the rope to the wooden crossbeam that still stood over the well. "Samuel," he called down, "I'm coming to get you. Just stay still and keep talking to me so I know you're okay." "I'm okay, mister," Samuel replied, his voice echoing. "But I'm awful cold." "Won't be cold for much longer," Zach promised. He turned to Theodora. "I need you to secure this end of the rope to my horse's saddle. Bandit's strong enough to pull us both up if needed." Theodora hurried to tie the rope as directed, her hands moving with newfound steadiness. When she returned, Zach had fashioned a crude harness from the leather belts. "I'll go down and secure your brother," he explained. "When I call up, you lead Bandit forward slowly to help pull us up."
Can you do that?
"Yes," Theodora said firmly. Zach lit the lantern and handed it to her. "Hold this over the well, so I can see." He positioned himself at the edge of the well, testing the rope with his weight before beginning his descent. Theodora watched as he disappeared into the darkness, her heart pounding against her ribs. "Samuel," she heard him call, his voice echoing up the stone walls. "I'm coming down to get you, buddy." The minutes that passed seemed like hours to Theodora as she held the lantern over the well opening. She could hear Zach's boots scraping against the sides of the well as he made his way down, occasionally calling out reassurances to Samuel. "I see him." Zach's voice finally echoed up. "He's standing on a ledge, about a foot above the water. Looks like he hurt his ankle in the fall." "Is he okay?" Theodora called down, her voice tight with worry. "He's a brave little man," Zach replied. "Samuel, I'm going to put this harness around you, and then we're going to climb out together. Your sister's waiting for you up top." Theodora could hear muffled conversation, then splashing sounds as Zach presumably reached Samuel's position. Several tense minutes passed. "Thea," Zach finally called up. "I've got him secured to me. Led Bandit forward slow and steady now." Theodora rushed to the chestnut stallion, taking his reins and speaking softly to him as she began to lead him away from the well. The rope grew taut, and she could hear the strain as the horse pulled against the weight of two bodies. "That's it," Zach called. "Keep it smooth." Theodora maintained a steady pace, glancing back frequently toward the well. After what seemed an eternity, she saw Zach's hand appear at the rim of the well, gripping the edge. With a tremendous effort, he pulled himself up, Samuel clinging to his back like a small monkey, the leather harness keeping him secure. "Sammy," Theodora cried out, rushing forward as Zach hauled them both onto solid ground. She gathered her brother into her arms, tears streaming down her face as she checked him for injuries. His clothes were soaked, and his face was pale with fear and cold, but he was alive. "My ankle hurts something awful, Thea," Samuel whimpered, clutching her tightly. Zach, breathing heavily from the exertion, knelt beside them. "Let's get him inside and warmed up. Then I'll take a look at that ankle." Theodora nodded gratefully. "Our cabin is just over there," she said, pointing to the simple log structure 100 yards away. Zach gathered Samuel into his arms. "Lead the way, Miss Jenkins." The cabin was modest, but well kept. Theodora quickly stoked the fire in the stone hearth while Zach set Samuel down on the worn sofa. She brought clean clothes for her brother and helped him change while Zach turned his back respectfully, busying himself with examining the contents of the cabin. It was a single room with a curtained-off sleeping area, a small table with 2 chairs, and a cooking area near the hearth. Simple but homely touches: a hand-stitched quilt, dried wildflowers in a tin can, and a shelf of well-worn books spoke of the care Theodora took with their humble home. "You two live here alone?" Zach asked as he accepted the cup of coffee Theodora offered him once Samuel was changed and wrapped in a blanket. "Yes, since our parents passed 3 years ago," she replied, pushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Father staked this claim 6 years back. We've managed to keep it going." Zach nodded, his expression thoughtful as he knelt beside Samuel. Let's see that ankle, young man. With gentle hands, he examined the swollen joint, his touch careful as Samuel winced. Not broken, I don't think, but a bad sprain for sure. He'll need to stay off it for a while. I'll make a poultice, Theodora said, moving to gather herbs from a small box near the cooking area. Mama taught me how. You're doing a fine job caring for your brother, Miss Jenkins, Zach said quietly. But this is rough country for a woman and child alone. Theodora stiffened slightly. We manage, Deputy York. This is our home. Zach held up his hands in a placating gesture. I meant no offense. It's clear you're capable. I just know firsthand how dangerous these parts can be. As Theodora prepared the herbal poultice, Samuel peppered Zach with questions about being a lawman. The deputy answered patiently, his deep voice filling the cabin with tales of tracking outlaws and protecting settlers, carefully edited for young ears. Are you chasing bad men now? Samuel asked, his pain momentarily forgotten in the excitement of having a real deputy in their home. Not at the moment, Zach replied. I'm heading back to Timber Creek after delivering a prisoner to Fort Laramie. Timber Creek. Theodora looked up from her work. That's a 2-day ride from here. It is, Zach confirmed. But I know this territory well. Been riding it for 5 years now. Theodora applied the poultice to Samuel's ankle, wrapping it carefully with a clean strip of cloth. It's getting late, she said. You're welcome to stay the night, deputy. It's the least we can offer after what you've done for us. I'd be obliged, Miss Jenkins, Zach replied, his blue eyes meeting hers with a warmth that sent an unexpected flutter through her chest. And please call me Zach. Then you must call me Thea, she responded, surprised by her own boldness. As the evening progressed, Theodora prepared a simple supper of beans, cornbread, and the last of a rabbit stew. They ate together at the small table, Samuel's animated chatter filling the space between them. For the first time in years, the cabin felt truly alive to Theodora, as if the walls themselves appreciated the presence of another adult voice besides her own. After supper, Zach insisted on helping with the dishes while Theodora settled Samuel into bed in the curtained-off area. When she returned, she found Zach standing by the open cabin door, gazing out at the stars that had appeared in the vast Wyoming sky. He's asleep already, she said softly, joining him at the doorway. The excitement wore him out. Zach nodded. He's a good kid. You've raised him well. I've done my best, Theodora admitted. Sometimes I worry it's not enough. What happened today, the well that could happen to anyone, Zach said, his voice gentle. No matter how careful you are. Theodora wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly aware of how close they were standing. If you hadn't been riding by when you did. But I was, Zach interrupted. Sometimes life works out that way. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the stars. Theodora couldn't remember the last time she had simply stood and appreciated the night sky. Her days were filled with endless work tending their small vegetable garden, caring for the few chickens and the milk cow they owned, teaching Samuel his letters and numbers, and trying to keep their small homestead from falling into disrepair. You should get some rest, Zach finally said. It's been a trying day. You can take my bed, Theodora offered. I'll sleep with Samuel. Zach shook his head firmly. I'll be fine here by the fire. I've slept on much worse than a cabin floor in my time. Despite her protests, he refused the bed, so Theodora brought him an extra quilt. Their fingers brushed as she handed it to him, and she felt that same unexpected flutter in her chest. Thank you, Thea, he said quietly, for the hospitality. It's nothing compared to what you did today, she replied. Good night, Zach. As she lay beside her sleeping brother that night, Theodora found herself unable to sleep. The events of the day played through her mind, alongside unbidden thoughts of the deputy's kind eyes and gentle hands. She told herself firmly that such thoughts were foolish. Deputy York was just passing through, and tomorrow he would ride on to Timber Creek, leaving her and Samuel to their solitary life once more. Morning came with golden light streaming through the cabin windows. Theodora rose early, as was her habit, to find Zach already awake and tending the fire. He had folded the quilt neatly and was brewing coffee when she emerged from behind the curtain. "Hope you don't mind," he said, gesturing to the coffee pot. "Thought you might appreciate a cup ready when you woke." "Not at all," Theodora replied, surprised and touched by the gesture. "Thank you." She set about making breakfast, acutely aware of Zach's presence as he moved about the small cabin, helping without being asked. They worked in comfortable silence, moving around each other with an ease that seemed impossible given they had only met the previous day. Samuel woke as the smell of frying bacon filled the cabin. Zach helped him to the table, carrying him to spare his injured ankle. Theodora watched the gentle way the deputy handled her brother, and something in her heart shifted. Over breakfast, Samuel pleaded with Zach to tell more stories about his life as a lawman. Zach obliged with tales that made the boy's eyes widen with excitement. When he mentioned a recent encounter with a pack of wolves while tracking a fugitive, Theodora found herself equally captivated by the story. "You face such dangers alone?" she asked. "Comes with the badge," Zach replied with a shrug. "Though I admit, there are times I envy men with homes and families to return to." Something in his tone made Theodora look up from her plate to find his blue eyes watching her intently. She felt heat rise to her cheeks and quickly looked away. After breakfast, Zach examined Samuel's ankle again. "The swelling's down a bit, but he'll need to rest it for at least a week, maybe more." Theodora sighed, thinking of all the chores that needed doing. With Samuel unable to help with his usual tasks, the burden would fall entirely on her shoulders. As if reading her thoughts, Zach said, "I could stay a day or two, help out around the place. The well needs a proper cover, for one thing." "I couldn't ask that of you," Theodora protested. "You're expected in Timber Creek." "They'll manage without me for a couple more days," Zach replied. "And I'd rest easier knowing that well was secured properly." Samuel's face lit up.
"Please stay, Zach."
"You can sleep in Pa's bed. Thea keeps it made up special, even though no one ever uses it." "Samuel," Theodora scolded, embarrassed by her brother's candor. Zach laughed, a warm sound that filled the cabin. "Well, if you're offering, I'd be much obliged. And I promised to earn my keep." And so it was decided. Zach sent a message with a passing stagecoach to inform his superiors in Timber Creek of his delay, citing assistance to settlers in need. The driver, an old acquaintance, promised to deliver the message promptly. Over the next 2 days, Zach proved true to his word. He built a sturdy new cover for the well, reinforced with metal bands he fashioned from an old barrel hoop. He mended the sagging porch steps, repaired the chicken coop where foxes had been getting in, and even managed to fix the leaking roof over the sleeping area, a task Theodora had been putting off for months. Watching him work, Theodora felt both grateful and increasingly drawn to him. It wasn't just his capable hands, or the way the sun caught his sandy hair when he removed his hat. It was the gentleness he showed with Samuel, teaching the boy how to whittle while his ankle healed. It was the respect in his voice when he spoke of her maintaining the homestead alone. It was the way he listened when she spoke, truly listened, as if her words mattered. On the evening of the second day, after Samuel had been tucked into bed, Theodora and Zach sat on the newly repaired porch steps, watching the sunset paint the prairie in hues of gold and crimson. "You've done so much for us," Theodora said softly. "I don't know how to thank you properly." "Seeing that boy's smile again is thanks enough," Zach replied, his shoulder close enough to hers that she could feel the warmth of him in the cooling evening air. "And knowing you're safer here. Still, you've delayed your return for our sake." Zach turned to look at her, his expression serious in the fading light. "Thea, I'm going to be honest with you. I haven't minded the delay one bit. In fact." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "In fact, these past 2 days have been the most at peace I've felt in a long time." Theodora's heart quickened at his words. Even with all the work you've been doing? That kind of work, fixing things, building something useful, it feels right in a way chasing outlaws sometimes doesn't. He looked out across the prairie. Don't get me wrong. I believe in what I do. But lately I've been wondering if there might be more to life than riding from town to town, always moving on. What would you do instead? Theodora asked, hardly daring to breathe as she waited for his answer. I've saved a fair bit over the years, he said. Enough for a small spread of my own, maybe. A place not unlike this one. His eyes met hers again. A place where a man could put down roots. The implication hung in the air between them, unspoken but unmistakable. Theodora felt a yearning she had suppressed for years rise within her, the desire for companionship, for sharing her life with someone who understood the value of what she had built here. Roots are important, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Samuel and I, we're rooted here. This land is all we have. It's good land, Zach agreed. Worth fighting for. Their conversation was interrupted by a distant rumble of hooves. In the gathering dusk, they could make out 3 riders approaching from the east, moving at a steady pace toward the cabin. Zach stood, his posture instantly alert. Were you expecting company? No, Theodora replied, rising as well. We rarely get visitors. Get inside, Zach said, his voice taking on the authoritative tone of a lawman. Lock the door behind you. What is it? What's wrong? Theodora asked, alarmed by a sudden change in demeanor. Probably nothing, he said, though his hand had moved to rest on his holstered pistol. But 3 riders coming at dusk isn't usually a social call. Go on now. Reluctantly, Theodora retreated inside, securing the door as instructed. Through the window, she watched as Zach stepped off the porch, positioning himself in the yard to meet the approaching riders. As they drew closer, she could make out 3 men, all wearing dust-covered clothing and wide-brimmed hats. The leader, a tall man with a shock of red hair visible beneath his hat, raised a hand in greeting as they reined their horses to a stop several yards from where Zach stood. Evening, Marshal, the red-haired man called out. Bit far from your usual territory, ain't you? Even through the closed door, Theodora could hear the conversation clearly in the still evening air. Deputy York, Zach corrected. And I go where I'm needed, Quinn. What brings you this way? The name sent a chill through Theodora. Even isolated as they were, she had heard of the Quinn brothers, cattle rustlers and troublemakers who operated throughout the territory. Just passing through, Quinn replied, his tone deceptively casual. Heading north to Montana. Thought we might ask for a bit of hospitality from these fine homesteaders. They're not equipped for visitors, Zach said firmly. Best you move on. One of the other men, smaller but with a wiry build that suggested dangerous quickness, leaned forward in his saddle. Since when do lawmen decide who can accept visitors? Maybe the lady of the house might feel different. The lady and her young brother have had a difficult few days, Zach replied, his stance widening slightly. The boy's injured, and they need their rest. There's a way station about 10 miles north that can accommodate you. The third man, who had remained silent until now, spat on the ground. We don't want no way station. We want a home-cooked meal and maybe some female company. Theodora's hand flew to her mouth, her heart pounding with fear. Inside the bedroom area, she could hear Samuel stirring, awakened by the voices outside. That's not going to happen, Zach said, his voice taking on a dangerous edge. You boys know who I am, and you know I don't make idle suggestions. Move on. Quinn studied Zach for a long moment, then let out a laugh that held no humor. Well now, Deputy, seems to me you're getting mighty protective over folks you barely know. Unless... His eyes shifted to the cabin. Unless you've got a personal interest here. My interest is keeping the peace, Zach replied evenly. And right now, peace means you 3 riding on. Quinn exchanged glances with his brothers, some unspoken communication passing between them. Then he sighed dramatically. All right, York. We'll ride on. But you remember this territories change hands all the time out here. Might be next time I pass through, you won't be around to play protector. That a threat, Quinn? Just an observation, Quinn replied with a twisted smile. Come on, boys. The deputies made his position clear. The three men wheeled their horses around and rode off, heading north as they had claimed. Zach remained standing in the yard until they were well out of sight before returning to the porch. Theodora unlocked the door with trembling hands. Who were they? She asked, though she already knew. The Quinn brothers, Zach confirmed, stepping inside and removing his hat. Bad news, but generally smart enough not to cross a federal badge directly. But they threatened to come back, Theodora said, fear evident in her voice. Men like that are full of threats, Zach replied, though she could see the concern in his eyes. But they also know I'll report this encounter. They usually prefer easier targets. The word, easier, hung in the air between them, a stark reminder of the vulnerability of her situation. Thea? Samuel called from the bedroom area. What's happening? Nothing, Sammy, she called back, forcing a reassuring tone. Just some travelers passing by. Go back to sleep. But Samuel, always stubborn, pushed aside the curtain and hobbled out, his injured ankle wrapped tightly. I heard men talking. They sounded angry. Zach moved to help the boy to a chair. Just some cowboys who got lost, Samuel. Nothing to worry about. Samuel looked between the adults, clearly not believing the simplified explanation but accepting it for now. Are you leaving tomorrow, Zach? He asked, changing the subject. Zach glanced at Theodora, a question in his eyes. I was planning to, he said carefully. But I'm thinking maybe I should stay another day or two, just to make sure that ankle of yours is healing properly. Relief flooded through Theodora, though she tried not to show it too openly. We'd welcome your company, she said, if you're sure you can delay your return further. I'm sure, Zach replied firmly. In fact, I was thinking of riding into town tomorrow for supplies. With your permission, of course. Town was a generous description for the small settlement 15 miles to the west, little more than a general store, a saloon, and a handful of rough buildings, but it was their closest source of provisions. That would be helpful, Theodora admitted. We're running low on flour and coffee. Then it's settled, Zach said. I'll ride out at first light, and be back by mid-afternoon. Samuel's face fell at the prospect of Zach leaving, even temporarily. Can I go with you? My ankle feels better. Not this time, buddy, Zach said gently. That ankle needs rest. But how about I bring you back something special? Samuel brightened immediately. Like what? That's for me to know and you to find out, Zach teased, ruffling the boy's hair. Later, after Samuel had been convinced to return to bed, Theodora found herself alone with Zach again. The encounter with the Quinn brothers had left her shaken, more aware than ever of her isolation and vulnerability. Were they really just passing through? She asked quietly as they sat by the fire. Zach sighed, running a hand through his hair. Hard to say. The Quinns are known for cattle rustling, not homestead troubles. But men like that, when they see a woman alone. He trailed off, unwilling to voice the dangers they both understood. I'm not completely defenseless, Theodora said, nodding toward the rifle mounted above the door. Pa taught me to shoot. I don't doubt your courage, Zach said, his eyes reflecting the firelight as he looked at her. But even the bravest person can be overwhelmed by numbers. Theodora stared into the flames, contemplating the reality of her situation. For 3 years she had maintained the fiction to herself as much as to Samuel that they could continue as they were, that determination and hard work were enough to secure their future. But the day's events had shattered that illusion. What am I going to do? She whispered, more to herself than to Zach. You have options, he said gently. There are settlements growing all around. Places where a woman of your intelligence and capability would be welcomed. And give up the land our parents worked so hard for? Theodora shook her head firmly. This is Samuel's inheritance. I can't abandon it. Zach was quiet for a long moment. There's another option, he said finally, his voice taking on an odd, hesitant quality she hadn't heard from him before. But it's not one I'd planned to mention so soon. Theodora looked up, meeting his gaze across the firelit space between them. What option? Zach leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. I told you earlier that I've been thinking about settling down, finding a place to put down roots. Yes, she said, her heart suddenly beating faster. What I didn't say is that meeting you and Samuel has clarified things for me. He paused, as if searching for the right words. Thea, I know we've only known each other a few days, and what I'm about to suggest might seem forward or even inappropriate. But there's something here, between us, that I haven't felt before. And I hope you might feel it too. Theodora remained silent, afraid to speak lest she break the moment that seemed suspended between them. I'm not proposing marriage, Zach continued quickly. Not yet. That would be too sudden for both of us. But I am proposing a partnership of sorts. I could stay, help you work this land, protect what you've built here. We could get to know each other properly, see if what I feel growing between us might be something worth building a life on. His proposition hung in the air, momentous and unexpected. Theodora's mind raced with implications, with fears and hopes she had long suppressed. You would give up your badge? She asked finally. Your life as a lawman? I've been wearing the badge for 5 years, Zach replied. I've done my part. And lately I've been thinking it might be time for something different. He smiled, a warm expression that reached his eyes. Something more. And if this feeling between us doesn't grow into what you hope. Theodora forced herself to ask the practical question, though part of her already knew the answer in her heart. Then I'll have helped a good woman and a fine boy secure their future, Zach said simply. I won't pretend I wouldn't be disappointed, but I'm offering this with open eyes, Thea. No expectations beyond what naturally develops between us. Theodora stood and moved to the window, looking out at the night-shrouded prairie. The vast emptiness that had been her constant companion for 3 years suddenly seemed less a symbol of freedom and more a representation of her isolation. Samuel adores you already, she said softly. And I've grown mighty fond of him too, Zach replied, remaining seated, giving her the space to think. People would talk, Theodora continued. A single woman taking in a man who's not her husband. They would, Zach agreed. Which is why I'd build a small cabin behind this one to start. Keep propriety intact while we figure things out. The thought he had put into this suggestion touched Theodora deeply. It wasn't a reckless proposition born of momentary attraction, but a considered offer that respected her position and reputation. I need time to think, she said finally, turning back to face him. This is unexpected. Of course, Zach said, rising from his chair. Take all the time you need. I'll ride to town tomorrow as planned, and when I return, we can talk more. Or not talk about it at all, if that's your preference. As he moved toward the door to check on the horses before turning in for the night, Theodora found herself speaking again. Zach, she said, causing him to pause with his hand on the door latch. Thank you. Not just for the offer, but for really seeing me when so many others look right through. He smiled, a gentle expression that warmed his weather-worn features. Seeing you is easy, Thea. It's looking away that would be impossible. With that, he slipped out into the night, leaving Theodora with a tumult of emotions and a decision that would shape the rest of her life. Morning arrived with a clarity that seemed to mirror Theodora's thoughts. She had slept little, her mind too full of possibilities to rest, but when she rose to prepare breakfast, she felt a surprising sense of calm. Zach was already up, tending to the horses and preparing for his ride to town. He accepted the coffee and biscuits she offered with a warm smile but made no mention of their conversation from the night before, true to his word to give her time to think. "I've made a list," Theodora said, handing him a carefully written inventory of supplies they needed. "And some money from what we've saved." "Keep your money," Zach said gently, pushing her hand back. "Consider this my contribution, regardless of what you decide about my offer." "I can't let you—" "You can," he interrupted. "And you will. Your pride does you credit, Thea, but there's no shame in accepting help when it's offered freely." Before she could argue further, Samuel hobbled out from behind the curtain, his face brightening at the sight of Zach. "You're really coming back, right?" the boy asked, a hint of anxiety in his voice that spoke of too many people who had left and never returned. Zach knelt to meet Samuel at eye level. "I promise, buddy. I'll be back before you know it. And I want you to do something important while I'm gone." "What?" Samuel asked eagerly. "I want you to take care of your sister." "Can you do that for me?" Samuel nodded solemnly, clearly taking the responsibility seriously. "I will." "Good man," Zach said, ruffling the boy's hair before standing. "And remember to keep that ankle elevated like I showed you." As he prepared to depart, Zach hesitated at the door, looking back at Theodora. Something in his gaze made her heart skip a beat, a mixture of hope and affection that she had never seen directed at her before. "Be careful," she said softly. "Always am," he replied with a smile. Then he was gone, the sound of hoofbeats fading as he rode toward town. The day stretched endlessly before Theodora as she went about her chores. She found herself pausing frequently, thinking of Zach's offer and what it might mean for her and Samuel. The prospect of not facing every challenge alone was tempting beyond words, but she had learned the hard way that life offered few guarantees. By mid-afternoon, she had made her decision. Whatever uncertainties the future held, she knew that the connection she felt with Zach was worth exploring. The practical benefits of his proposal were undeniable, but it was the way he looked at her as if she were something precious rather than merely useful that ultimately swayed her heart. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Theodora found herself glancing repeatedly down the trail, expecting to see Zach's familiar figure. But the prairie remained empty, the only movement coming from the wind rippling through the tall grasses. "Shouldn't Zach be back by now?" Samuel asked from his perch on the porch, where he had been whittling a piece of wood with the small knife Zach had given him. "The trading post might have been busy," Theodora replied, trying to keep the worry from her voice. "Or maybe he ran into friends in town." But as the sun dipped lower, her reassurances rang hollow even to her own ears. Town was only 15 miles away, a few hours' ride at most. Zach should have returned hours ago. By the time dusk fell, Theodora could no longer pretend that nothing was wrong. She served Samuel a quiet supper, then tucked him into bed despite his protests that he wanted to wait up for Zach. "I'll wake you when he returns," she promised, knowing it might be a lie, but unwilling to share her growing fear with her brother. Alone in the main room, Theodora paced, her mind conjuring increasingly worrisome scenarios. Had Zach been thrown from his horse? Attacked by bandits? Or the thought that hurt the most, had he simply changed his mind about returning? No, she rejected that last possibility firmly. Whatever else was uncertain, she was sure of Zach's integrity. If he had promised to return, then only something serious would have prevented him from doing so. The night grew darker, and still no sign of Zach. Theodora found herself standing on the porch, straining to hear any sound of approach. The vast Wyoming night stretched around her, the stars impossibly bright in the clear sky. Somewhere out there, Zach was in trouble. She felt it with a certainty that defied explanation. Making a sudden decision, Theodora went inside and took down her father's rifle from above the door. She checked that it was loaded, then gathered a lantern and some basic provisions. She couldn't leave Samuel alone to search for Zach herself, but she could be prepared if trouble came to them instead. She had just finished her preparations when the sound of hoofbeats broke the night's stillness. Relief flooded through her as she rushed to the door, but it died just as quickly when she realized the approaching riders were moving too fast, and there were too many of them. Through the window, she could make out at least 5 mounted figures approaching at a gallop. Her blood ran cold when moonlight glinted off red hair as they drew closer. Quinn and his brothers had returned, and they'd brought reinforcements. Theodora grabbed the rifle and moved to wake Samuel. "Sammy," she whispered urgently, shaking him. "I need you to get up now. We have to hide." "What?" he mumbled sleepily. "Is Zach back?" "No, it's not Zach," she said, helping him up. "There are bad men coming. We need to go to the hiding place Pa built." Samuel was instantly alert, fear widening his eyes. "Like when the Blackfoot came that time?" "Yes," Theodora confirmed, guiding him toward the loose floorboard near the hearth. 3 years ago, during a period of tension with the local tribes, their father had constructed a small space beneath the cabin floor just large enough for a woman and child to hide in during an emergency. Theodora lifted the concealed trapdoor and helped Samuel down into the dark space. "Stay quiet, no matter what you hear," she instructed, handing him a small sack containing water and some hard biscuits. "Don't come out until I come for you, or until everything has been silent for a very long time. Understand?" Samuel nodded, his small face solemn in the dim light. "What about you, Thea? Aren't you coming too?" "There's not enough room for us both anymore," she said, which was true. Samuel had grown considerably since the hiding place was built. "I'll lead them away from here if I can." "But Thea, hush now," she said, leaning down to kiss his forehead. "Be brave, like Pa taught us." Before he could protest further, she closed the trapdoor and quickly replaced the rug that concealed it. Then she grabbed the rifle and slipped out the back door of the cabin just as the riders thundered into the yard. Crouching in the shadows beside the small barn, Theodora watched as Quinn and his men dismounted. There were 5 of them now, and all appeared armed. "Hello, the house," Quinn called out, his voice carrying a false joviality that sent chills down Theodora's spine. "Miss Jenkins? Deputy York? We've come calling." Silence greeted his hail. Theodora held her breath, hoping against hope that they might believe the cabin was empty. "Now don't be shy," Quinn continued, moving toward the porch. "We know you're in there, and we've brought something that might interest you." At his gesture, 2 of the men dragged a third figure forward from where he had been held on one of the horses. Even in the dim moonlight, Theodora recognized Zach's tall form. His hands appeared to be bound, and he moved with the stiffness of a man in pain. "Your lawman friend here ran into a bit of trouble on the road," Quinn announced, shoving Zach forward so that he stumbled onto his knees. "Seems he got concerned when he spotted us heading back this way. Tried to arrest the lot of us for suspicious behavior." Imagine that! From her hiding place, Theodora could see blood on the side of Zach's face. His hat was gone, and his clothing was disheveled as if he had been in a fight. "Miss Jenkins," Quinn called again. "I know you're listening. Come on out now, and maybe we won't have to see how much more pain your deputy friend can take." To emphasize his point, one of the men kicked Zach hard in the ribs, causing him to double over with a grunt of pain. Theodora raised the rifle, sighting along the barrel at Quinn. She could take him down from here. She was sure of it. But what then? There would still be 4 armed men, and she had only 1 rifle with limited ammunition. And Zach, helpless between them, would likely be the first to die in the ensuing chaos. She needed a different plan. Looking around desperately, her eyes fell on the horses. They were clustered near the well, loosely tethered to allow them to drink. If she could create a diversion, frighten the horses enough to cause confusion, perhaps she could get to Zach. Moving silently through the shadows, Theodora made her way toward the back of the barn where a small pile of oil-soaked torches was stored for emergency lighting. Her father had shown her how to use them to scare off predators that sometimes threaten their livestock. She took one, along with a box of matches. Meanwhile, Quinn's patience was clearly wearing thin. "Last chance, Miss Jenkins," he shouted. "Come out now, or we start breaking pieces off your deputy." To punctuate his threat, he drew his pistol and pressed it against Zach's temple. Even from a distance, Theodora could see Zach's defiant expression as he glared up at his captor. "She's not here," Zach said, his voice carrying clearly in the night air. "Took the boy and left this morning, heading for her sister's place in Laramie." Quinn struck him across the face with the pistol. "You're lying. Her horse is still in the corral." "Borrowed a wagon from a neighbor," Zach replied, spitting blood onto the ground. "Smart woman, saw trouble coming." His attempt to protect her warmed Theodora's heart even as it increased her determination. She lit the torch, its sudden flare of light hidden behind the barn, then circled around toward where the horses were tethered. Quinn was growing increasingly agitated. "Search the house," he ordered 2 of his men. "Tear it apart if you have to." As the men moved toward the cabin, Theodora took her chance. She flung the burning torch directly into the midst of the horses, then fired a shot into the air. The combination of fire and gunshot had the desired effect. The horses reared and bucked in panic, breaking their tethers and scattering in all directions. In the chaos that followed, Theodora fired again, this time aiming at the ground near Quinn's feet. He jumped back reflexively, momentarily releasing his grip on Zach. "Run," she shouted, continuing to fire to keep the men's heads down as they scrambled for cover. Zach, despite his bound hands, lunged to his feet and staggered toward the sound of her voice. Theodora met him halfway, quickly slicing through his bonds with the knife she had taken from the barn. "Samuel," he gasped, blood trickling from a cut above his eye. "Hidden," she assured him, pulling him toward the darkness beyond the barn. "Can you ride?" "If it means getting you out of here, yes," he replied grimly. Behind them, Quinn was shouting orders, trying to regain control of the situation. Most of the horses had scattered, but 2 remained, still tethered more securely than the others at the far side of the corral. Together, they made it to the horses. Zach, despite his injuries, helped Theodora mount before pulling himself painfully onto the second animal. "We can't leave Samuel," Theodora said, anguish in her voice as she looked back toward the cabin where Quinn's men were now visible through the windows, searching inside. "We're not leaving him," Zach assured her. "But we need help to deal with Quinn and his gang. There's a cavalry patrol camped about 5 miles west of here. I passed them on my way to town this morning." Theodora hesitated, torn between staying close to protect Samuel and the knowledge that they needed reinforcements to overcome the 5 armed men. "He's well hidden?"
Zach asked urgently.
"Yes," she confirmed, "in a space beneath the floor. They won't find him unless they tear up every board." "Then we ride for help," Zach decided. "Fast and quiet now." They urged their horses forward, keeping to the shadows at the edge of the property. Behind them, they could hear Quinn cursing as he realized his quarry had escaped. "They can't have gone far," his voice carried on the night air. "Find their tracks." Theodora and Zach rode hard through the darkness, guided only by starlight and Zach's unerring sense of direction. Despite his injuries, he set a pace that spoke of years in the saddle and an intimate knowledge of the territory. "How did they capture you?" Theodora asked as they rode side by side. "Ambushed me on the road back from town," Zach replied grimly. "I'd spotted them heading toward your place earlier and tried to cut them off. There were only 3 then, Quinn and his brothers. But they'd met up with 2 more men in town, former outlaws I've had dealings with before. They hurt you," Theodora said, noting the way he winced with each movement of his horse. "Nothing that won't heal," he assured her. "I'm more worried about what they plan to do at your homestead. Quinn's not just a cattle rustler, he's been moving into land grabs lately, forcing out smallholders, then selling the land to larger interests. That's why they came back," Theodora realized. Not just because we turn them away, but because they want our land. Land with a good water source is valuable in these parts, Zach confirmed. And a woman alone, or so they thought, would be an easy target. They rode in silence for a time, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Zach pointed ahead to where the faint glow of campfires was visible in a small valley. The cavalry patrol, he said. Captain Harding is a good man. He'll help us. Within minutes, they were riding into the camp, immediately challenged by alert sentries. Zach identified himself, and they were quickly escorted to the captain's tent. Captain Harding was a weathered man in his 40s, with a neatly trimmed beard and the no-nonsense demeanor of a career soldier. He listened gravely as Zach explained the situation. Quinn and his gang have been a thorn in our side for months, the captain said when Zach had finished. But attacking a federal officer, that's a new level of boldness, even for them. It's not just me I'm concerned about, Captain, Zach said, wincing as a medic tended to the cut on his forehead. There's a young boy hidden in that cabin and 5 armed men searching for him. We need to move quickly. And we will, Harding assured him, already issuing orders to his lieutenant. We can be mounted and ready in 10 minutes. True to his word, the captain had his men a patrol of 12 experienced soldiers mounted and ready to ride in short order. Theodora, despite Zach's concern for her safety, refused to remain behind. Samuel is my brother, she said firmly. I'm coming with you. Seeing the determination in her eyes, Zach nodded. Stay close to me. They rode hard through the night, the soldiers moving with disciplined precision. As they approached the Jenkins homestead, Captain Harding signaled for silence, and the patrol spread out to surround the property. Through the darkness, they could see lights moving in and around the cabin. Quinn and his men were still searching, their frustration evident in their rough handling of the furniture they dragged outside. They haven't found Samuel, Theodora whispered, relief evident in her voice. And they won't get the chance, Captain Harding said grimly. He turned to his men. Prepare to move on my signal. The attack, when it came, was swift and overwhelming. The soldiers converged from all sides, catching Quinn and his gang completely by surprise. 2 of the outlaws immediately surrendered, throwing down their weapons at the sight of the blue uniforms. Another tried to flee but was quickly captured by 2 mounted soldiers who had circled behind the barn. Quinn and his younger brother, however, barricaded themselves inside the cabin, using the sturdy log walls for protection. Come out, Quinn, Captain Harding called. You're surrounded. There's no escape. Maybe not, Quinn's voice came back. But we can make it mighty expensive for you to come in after us. How many men are you willing to lose, Captain? Theodora's heart raced at the thought of Samuel, hidden beneath the floor while armed men stalked above him. If shooting started inside the cabin, a stray bullet could easily penetrate the thin floorboards. Let me try, she said suddenly, moving forward before anyone could stop her. Miss Jenkins, Captain Harding hissed. Get back here. But Theodora had already stepped into the open area before the cabin, deliberately placing herself where Quinn could see her through the window. Mr. Quinn, she called out, her voice steadier than she felt. This is Theodora Jenkins. It's my home you're in. There was a moment of silence, then Quinn's face appeared at the window. Well, well, the lady of the house returns. Come to negotiate, have you? I've come to tell you that there's nothing for you here, she replied. Whatever you want with my land, it's not worth dying for. Quinn laughed, a harsh sound in the night air. Bold words from a woman who ran rather than face me. I ran to get help, Theodora corrected him. And now that help is here. 12 soldiers and a captain who seems very eager to hang you for attacking a federal officer. She could see Quinn processing this information, his eyes darting to the soldiers visible in the yard. What are you proposing? He asked finally. Surrender peacefully, she said. Come out without your weapons, and Captain Harding will ensure you get a fair trial. A fair trial? Quinn spat. We both know what that means for men like me in these parts. It's more than you'd get if you harm my brother, Theodora replied, an edge entering her voice. Because if you do, there won't be a trial. I'll kill you myself. The absolute conviction in her tone seemed to give Quinn pause. He stared at her for a long moment, then disappeared from the window. Muffled conversation could be heard from inside the cabin. Theodora stood her ground, though she could feel Zach and the soldiers tensing behind her, ready to intervene at the first sign of threat. Finally, Quinn's voice called out again. All right, Miss Jenkins. You win this round. We're coming out. True to his word, the door opened, and Quinn and his brother emerged with their hands raised. Captain Harding's men quickly moved in to disarm and secure them. As soon as it was safe, Theodora rushed into the cabin, dropping to her knees beside the hidden trapdoor. Samuel, she called, pulling back the rug and lifting the wooden panel. It's me, Thea. You can come out now. For a heart-stopping moment, there was no response. Then a small voice came from the darkness. Thea? Is it really you? Yes, Sammy, she replied, tears of relief streaming down her face. It's really me. The bad men are gone. A small hand reached up from the darkness, and Theodora pulled her brother into her arms, holding him tightly as he burst into tears of fear and relief. You came back for me, he sobbed into her shoulder. You came back. Of course I did, she murmured, stroking his hair. I will always come back for you, Sammy. Zach appeared in the doorway, his tall frame silhouetted against the night sky. Despite his injuries, he knelt beside them, placing a gentle hand on Samuel's shoulder. You were very brave, buddy, he said softly. Just like I knew you would be. Samuel looked up, his tear-streaked face breaking into a smile of pure joy when he recognized Zach. You came back too. I promised I would, didn't I? Zach replied, his voice rough with emotion. Outside, they could hear Captain Harding issuing orders as his men secured the prisoners for transport. The immediate danger was past, but the cabin was in disarray, furniture overturned and possessions scattered in the outlaws' frantic search. They made a real mess of things, Samuel observed, looking around with the straightforward assessment of a child. Things can be fixed, Theodora said, rising to her feet with her brother still in her arms. What matters is that we're all safe. Zach stood as well, wincing slightly as he straightened. The captain says they'll camp here tonight, if that's all right with you. Give you some extra protection while things settle down. Of course, Theodora agreed. And in the morning? She trailed off, suddenly uncertain. The events of the night had pushed aside the decision she had made earlier about Zach's proposal. Now, with the immediate crisis past, she found herself looking at him with new eyes, seeing not just the kind man who had saved her brother from the well, but the brave one who had put himself in danger to protect them both. Seeming to read her thoughts, Zach smiled gently. In the morning, we'll talk. About everything. But for now, let's get this place put back together. With the help of several soldiers, they quickly restored order to the cabin. Samuel, despite his injured ankle and the ordeal he had endured, insisted on helping, proudly showing the soldiers the hiding place his father had built and explaining how he had stayed perfectly quiet even when the bad men had walked right over him. By the time they had finished, dawn was breaking over the eastern horizon, painting the prairie in shades of gold and amber. The soldiers had established a perimeter around the homestead, and Captain Harding had set up a temporary command post near the barn, where Quinn and his men were being held under guard. Exhausted but too keyed up to sleep, Theodora found herself on the porch as the sun rose, a cup of coffee warming her hands. Zach joined her, his injuries cleaned and bandaged by the military medic. Samuel's finally asleep, he said, leaning against the railing beside her. It took 3 stories and a promise that I'd still be here when he woke up. Will you? Theodora asked, looking up at him. Still be here, I mean. Zach met her gaze steadily. If you want me to be. I do, she replied simply. I made my decision before.
Before all this happened.
I was going to tell you when you returned from town. A smile spread slowly across Zach's face, lighting his tired eyes. And what decision was that, Miss Jenkins? That I'd like to accept your proposal, she said, her voice gaining confidence as she spoke. The partnership you offered. The chance to see if what's growing between us might become something more. Zach's smile widened, and he reached out to take her hand, his touch gentle despite the calluses that spoke of years of hard work. I'm mighty glad to hear that, Thea. Because after last night, the thought of riding away from here from you and Samuel seems impossible. It won't be easy, Theodora cautioned. This land demands everything from those who work it. Nothing worth having comes easy, Zach replied. And what I see here, he gestured to encompass not just the homestead but Theodora herself, is worth everything. A comfortable silence fell between them as they watched the sun rise higher, casting long shadows across the land that had seen so much struggle and now, perhaps, held the promise of something new. Captain Harding offered me a job, Zach said finally. Once I've recovered from these injuries. Said the territory could use experienced men to help maintain law and order as more settlers arrive. And what did you tell him? Theodora asked, studying his profile in the morning light. I told him I'd consider it, Zach replied. It would mean less traveling than my current position. I could be based closer to home. He paused, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. To here, I mean. Home, Theodora repeated softly. I like the sound of that. In the weeks that followed, life at the Jenkins homestead settled into a new rhythm. True to his word, Zach built a small cabin for himself behind the main house, though he spent most of his daylight hours working alongside Theodora to prepare for the approaching winter. Samuel's ankle healed completely, and he shadowed Zach constantly, absorbing every bit of knowledge the older man offered. Word of the confrontation with the Quinn gang spread throughout the territory, bringing unexpected consequences. Neighboring homesteaders, previously distant due to the miles between properties, made a point of visiting, offering friendship and support to the woman who had stood her ground against notorious outlaws. The isolation that had defined Theodora's life for 3 years gradually gave way to a sense of community. Captain Harding made good on his offer, appointing Zach as a local deputy with responsibility for the growing settlements in the area. The position allowed him to maintain his commitment to law and order while remaining close to the homestead to Theodora and Samuel. As autumn painted the prairie in russet and gold, Zach and Theodora's partnership deepened into something neither had dared hope for in the beginning. Their initial attraction had been tested by fire and emerged stronger, tempered by shared danger and daily cooperation. On a crisp October evening, as they sat on the porch watching Samuel chase fireflies in the yard, Zach took Theodora's hand in his. I've been thinking, he said, his voice carrying a note of nervous anticipation she had never heard from him before, about our arrangement. Oh, Theodora replied, her heart quickening despite her outward calm. It's working well, Zach continued, his thumb tracing small circles on the back of her hand. Better than I'd even hoped. But I find myself wanting more, Thea. He turned to face her fully, his blue eyes serious in the fading light. I want to be more than your partner in working this land. More than Samuel's friend and protector. I want to be your husband if you'll have me. Though she had sensed this moment approaching, the reality of it still took Theodora's breath away. For 3 years, she had been defined by loss and struggle, by the responsibilities she had shouldered alone. To consider a future shaped by choice rather than necessity, by love rather than duty, seemed almost too much to hope for. Samuel would be pleased, she said finally, a smile tugging at her lips. He asked me just yesterday when you were going to stop living in that silly little cabin and move into ours properly. Zach laughed, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. Smart kid. But it's not Samuel's answer I'm seeking, Thea. It's yours. Theodora looked out across the land that had been both her burden and her salvation. Then she turned back to Zach, seeing in his weathered face everything she had never dared to want for herself. Yes, she said simply. Yes, I'll marry you, Zachariah York. The joy that transformed his face was worth every hardship she had endured to reach this moment. He leaned forward, one hand coming up to cup her cheek as he kissed her not for the first time, but with a new sense of promise that made it feel like a beginning. Thea. Samuel's excited voice broke the moment as he ran up to the porch, a jar of captured fireflies clutched in his hands. Look what I caught. Zach, can we use them to light my room tonight? For a little while, Zach agreed, ruffling the boy's hair. But then we'll have to set them free. Wild things aren't meant to be kept. Samuel nodded solemnly, then looked between the two adults, his perceptive eyes narrowing slightly. Why are you both smiling like that? Theodora exchanged a glance with Zach, who nodded encouragingly. Well, Sammy, she said, drawing her brother close. Zach has asked me to marry him, and I've said yes. He's going to be part of our family officially. Samuel's face lit up with a joy that matched their own. Really? You'll be my brother now, Zach. Something like that, Zach agreed, his voice rough with emotion. Though technically I'll be your brother-in-law. Does that mean you'll live in the house with us? And stay forever? Yes to both, Zach confirmed, including both Samuel and Theodora in his warm gaze. If that's all right with you. Samuel's response was to launch himself into Zach's arms with such force that the man nearly toppled from his chair. It's more than all right, the boy declared. It's perfect. Over Samuel's head, Zach's eyes met Theodora's, and in that moment, she knew with absolute certainty that the decision she had made was the right one. The journey that had begun with terror, a little boy falling down a well, a stranger coming to his rescue, had led them to a future brighter than she could have imagined. Winter came early that year, blanketing the prairie in pristine white. The wedding took place in the small church that had been built in the growing settlement 12 miles from their homestead. The entire community turned out for the occasion, along with Captain Harding and several of his men who had been present on the night of the confrontation with Quinn. Theodora wore a dress of deep blue that Zach had brought back from a trip to Cheyenne, with a white lace collar that had belonged to her mother. Samuel, standing proud in his best shirt and trousers, handed over the simple gold band that Zach placed on Theodora's finger. I take you, Theodora Jenkins, to be my lawfully wedded wife. Zach's deep voice carried through the small church, his eyes never leaving hers as he spoke the traditional vows. To have and to hold, from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do us part. When it was her turn, Theodora's voice was steady, filled with a confidence born of certainty. I take you, Zachariah York, to be my lawfully wedded husband. To have and to hold, from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do us part. The minister, a young man newly arrived from Boston, pronounced them husband and wife with evident pleasure. You may kiss the bride, he told Zach, who needed no further encouragement. The kiss they shared was brief, but profound, a sealing of promises that both intended to keep for a lifetime. The celebration that followed at the homestead was filled with laughter, music, and more food than Theodora had seen in one place since before her parents died. Neighbors had contributed dishes, Captain Harding had provided a barrel of good whiskey, and even the weather cooperated, the winter sun shining brightly on the gathering. As evening approached and the guests began to depart, Samuel pulled Zach aside, his expression suddenly serious. Now that you're married to Thea, does that make you my pa? He asked, his voice hushed. Zach knelt to meet the boy at eye level, as was his habit when they spoke of important things. I can never replace your real pa, Samuel, he said gently. He was a good man who loved you very much. But if you'd like, I'd be honored to be a father to you in his place." Samuel considered this solemnly, then nodded. "I'd like that. And I think Pa would too. He always said taking care of family was the most important job a man could have." "Your Pa was right about that," Zach agreed, his voice rough with emotion. "And I promise you, Samuel, that's a job I'll never take lightly." The boy threw his arms around Zach's neck in a fierce hug, then ran off to help the last departing guests collect their dishes and belongings. Later, as the winter night descended and Samuel slept soundly in his room, Theodora and Zach stood on the porch of what was now truly their home, looking out at the star-filled sky. "Happy, Mrs. York?" Zach asked, his arm wrapped securely around her waist. "Very," Theodora replied, leaning into his warmth. "Though it may take some getting used to the name, I mean." "We have time," Zach said simply. "All the time in the world." As they turned to go inside, Theodora paused, her eyes drawn to the newly covered well that had been the starting point of their journey together. "Do you ever think about how different things might have been if Samuel hadn't fallen that day? If you hadn't been riding by at that exact moment?" Zach followed her gaze, his expression thoughtful. "I believe some things are meant to be, Thea. Not that the hardships are planned. I'd never wish that fear on either of you, but that when two people are meant to find each other, life has a way of making it happen." "Even on the vast Wyoming frontier?" she asked, a smile playing at her lips. "Especially here," he replied, drawing her closer. "Where else could a man so clearly see the hand of Providence at work? What are the chances that I would pass by just when you needed help most? That I would recognize in those first moments something in you that called to something in me?" Theodora had no answer for these questions, but as Zach led her inside to the warmth of their home, she knew with absolute certainty that whatever forces had brought them together, chance, fate, or divine intervention, she was profoundly grateful for them. Spring came to the Wyoming territory, with its usual drama, fierce storms followed by days of brilliant sunshine that coaxed new life from the soil. The homestead flourished under the care of 3 pairs of hands instead of Theodora's 2. Zach's strength and skills complemented her knowledge of the land, and together they accomplished tasks that would have taken her weeks to complete alone. With the spring planting finished, Zach turned his attention to expanding their operation. Using money he had saved during his years as a marshal, he purchased additional cattle and horses, transforming the small subsistence farm into a more viable ranch. He hired 2 young men from the settlement to help with the expanding workload, building a bunkhouse for them near his former cabin, which now served as a storehouse. Samuel thrived under the new arrangement, dividing his time between helping with the ranch work and attending the small school that had been established in the growing settlement. Under Zach's patient tutelage, he became an accomplished rider and showed a natural talent for working with the horses, especially the spirited yearlings Zach had purchased to improve their stock. As for Theodora, she discovered that sharing her burdens allowed her to rediscover joys she had set aside after her parents' deaths. She planted a larger garden than ever before, including flowers as well as vegetables. In the evenings, she returned to the piano playing she had loved as a girl, teaching Samuel on the small instrument Zach had surprised her with on her 23rd birthday. Most precious of all were the quiet moments she and Zach carved out for themselves: early mornings watching the sunrise from the porch, evenings by the fire after Samuel was asleep, stolen moments during the workday when their paths crossed and they took time to simply be together. On a warm June evening, nearly a year after Samuel's fall into the well, Theodora sat on the porch, watching Zach and Samuel return from checking the northern pasture. The sight of them riding together, Samuel sitting tall in his saddle beside the man who had become his father in every way that mattered, filled her heart with a contentment she had once thought beyond her reach. When they dismounted near the barn, Samuel ran ahead to the house while Zach took care of the horses. The boy bounded up the porch steps, his face alight with excitement. "Thea," he exclaimed, Zach says I can help break the new colt when it's time. He says I have the right touch with horses. Does he now? Theodora replied, raising an eyebrow. And what does Zach say about you finishing your schoolwork before taking on such responsibilities? Samuel's expression turned sheepish. He says school comes first. But Thea, the teacher says I'm the best reader in the class. Surely that counts for something. It counts for a great deal, she agreed, ruffling his hair. Now go wash up for supper. We're having your favorite venison stew. As Samuel disappeared into the house, Zach approached the porch, removing his hat as he climbed the steps. Despite the dust of the trail, he was still the most handsome man Theodora had ever seen, his blue eyes crinkling at the corners as he smiled at her. I see Samuel couldn't wait to tell you about the colt, he said, dropping onto the bench beside her. He's got a gift with horses, Thea. Reminds me of myself at that age. You'll be careful with him, she said, not quite a question. Always, Zach promised, taking her hand. He's as much my son now as if he'd been born to me. I'd never put him at risk. Theodora nodded, knowing he spoke the truth. In the months since their marriage, Zach had proven himself a thoughtful and protective father, guiding Samuel with a firm but gentle hand. The boy had flourished under his attention, growing in confidence and skill. I have something to tell you, she said, turning to face him more fully. Something important. Zach's expression turned serious. What is it, Thea? Is something wrong? Not wrong, she assured him, her free hand moving unconsciously to rest on her abdomen. But definitely life-changing. Understanding dawned in Zach's eyes, and he looked down at her hand, then back up to her face. Are you saying what I think you're saying? Theodora nodded, a smile spreading across her face. Dr. Thompson confirmed it yesterday when I went into town. We're going to have a baby, Zach. In about 6 months, according to his calculations. For a moment, Zach seemed frozen, his expression one of stunned disbelief. Then, with a whoop that likely startled the horses in the barn, he lifted Theodora from her seat and spun her around, his face alight with joy. A baby, he repeated, setting her gently back on her feet but keeping his arms around her. Our baby. Our baby, she confirmed, laughing at his exuberance. The door of the cabin flew open, and Samuel stood there, drawn by the commotion. What's happening? He demanded. Why are you shouting, Zach? Zach and Theodora exchanged a look, silently agreeing that this was news to be shared immediately rather than kept secret. Come here, Sammy, Theodora said, holding out her hand to her brother. Zach and I have something wonderful to tell you. Samuel approached cautiously, looking between them with suspicion. If it's so wonderful, why do you both look so serious now? Zach laughed, ruffling the boy's hair. Because it's serious good news, buddy. The best kind. You're going to be an uncle, Theodora said simply. I'm going to have a baby. Samuel's eyes widened comically. A baby? Like Mrs. Peterson's new baby? Just like that, Theodora confirmed. Only this one will be your niece or nephew, and you'll be able to teach them all sorts of things as they grow up. Samuel considered this for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. Then he looked up at Zach. Does this mean you'll still want me around? Even with your own baby? Zach knelt to meet Samuel at eye level, his hands on the boy's shoulders. Samuel Jenkins York, he said firmly, using the name they had adopted after the wedding. No baby, not even one of my own blood, could ever change how I feel about you. You're my son in every way that matters. This baby won't change that. It will just mean our family is growing. Samuel searched Zach's face, then nodded, apparently satisfied with what he found there. All right then, he said with the gravity of a much older person. I guess I'd better start practicing being an uncle. The months that followed were busy ones at the York homestead. Zach threw himself into preparations for the baby's arrival with the same dedication he brought to everything he cared about. He expanded the cabin, adding a proper bedroom for Samuel and a nursery adjacent to the main sleeping area. He carved a cradle from oak, sanding it to silky smoothness and staining it a warm honey color that matched their bedroom furniture. Theodora watched his preparations with amusement and love, even as her own body changed to accommodate the new life growing within her. As her pregnancy progressed, she was forced to delegate more of the physical work around the homestead, a concession that would have frustrated her in the past but now seemed a small price to pay for the joy they all anticipated. Samuel took his upcoming role as uncle very seriously, reading every book he could find about babies and their care. He appointed himself Theodora's special helper, fetching things she needed and making sure she rested adequately. His protective instincts, always strong, became almost comical in their intensity. "You shouldn't be carrying that, Thea," he would scold when he caught her with a basket of laundry or a pail of water. "Zach says you need to be careful." "I'm pregnant, Sammy. Not made of glass," she would reply, though she often surrendered the burden to her determined brother. Winter settled over the prairie once more, bringing with it the isolation that the season always imposed on frontier settlements. But unlike previous winters, when Theodora had faced the long dark days with only Samuel for company, the York homestead was a place of warmth and activity. Zach's position as deputy kept him close to home most days, venturing out only when duty called. When blizzards made travel impossible, he turned his attention to indoor projects, repairing furniture, making improvements to the cabin, and teaching Samuel the fine points of leatherworking. On the coldest nights, they gathered around the fire as a family, Zach reading aloud from one of the books he regularly brought back from his trips to larger settlements. Samuel would listen, captivated, while Theodora sewed tiny garments for the baby, her hands never idle despite her growing fatigue. It was on one such night, with snow howling around the cabin and the fire crackling merrily in the hearth, that Theodora felt the first sharp pain that signaled the beginning of labor. "Zach," she said quietly, not wanting to alarm Samuel, who was engrossed in the story. "I think it's time." Zach's reading faltered, and he looked up, instantly alert to the meaning behind her words. "Now?" But Dr. Thompson said it would likely be another 2 weeks. "The baby has other ideas," Theodora replied, wincing as another pain gripped her. "And I don't think Dr. Thompson will be able to get here in this storm." The reality of their situation hit them both at the same moment. They were isolated by the blizzard, miles from the nearest neighbor, and even further from medical help. The baby would be born here, in their cabin, with only Zach to assist. "Samuel," Zach said, setting aside the book, "I need you to be very brave and helpful now. Your sister is going to have the baby tonight." Samuel's eyes widened with a mixture of excitement and fear. "But the doctor isn't here." "No, he isn't," Zach agreed calmly, though Theodora could see the anxiety he was working to control. "So we're going to help Thea ourselves. First, I need you to bring all the clean linens from the chest in the bedroom. Then put water on to boil lots of it." As Samuel hurried to follow these instructions, Zach helped Theodora to their bedroom, his strong arms supporting her as another contraction came. "I've never delivered a baby," he admitted quietly once they were alone. "But I've helped birth countless foals and calves. The principle can't be that different, right?" Despite her discomfort, Theodora laughed. "I'm not a horse, Zach." "Thank God for that," he replied with a grin that didn't quite hide his worry. "You're much more complicated and infinitely more precious." The hours that followed tested them all. Theodora's labor progressed steadily, each contraction bringing the baby closer to birth, but also increasing her pain and exhaustion. Zach remained at her side, his quiet strength giving her courage when her own began to flag. Samuel stationed himself as messenger and helper, running for water, linens, or whatever else Zach requested, his young face set with determination. As midnight approached and the storm reached its peak outside, Theodora felt an overwhelming urge to push. Zach, who had been timing her contractions with remarkable composure, recognized the signs. "It's time," he said, positioning himself to receive the baby. "Samuel, I need you to sit behind your sister and support her shoulders. Thea, when the next pain comes, push as hard as you can." Through a haze of exhaustion and pain, Theodora did as instructed, bearing down with all her remaining strength. Samuel, despite his youth, proved an excellent support, encouraging her with words and steadying her with his presence. "I can see the head," Zach exclaimed after several grueling pushes. "One more big push, Thea. You can do this." With a final, monumental effort, Theodora pushed, and the baby slipped into Zach's waiting hands, a perfect, tiny being announcing its arrival with a lusty cry that filled the cabin. "It's a girl," Zach announced, his voice choked with emotion as he quickly wrapped the infant in a clean cloth. "We have a daughter, Thea. A beautiful, perfect daughter." He placed the baby on Theodora's chest, where she immediately quieted, seeming to recognize the sound of her mother's heartbeat. Theodora looked down at the tiny face, overwhelmed by a love so powerful it seemed to transcend her physical exhaustion. "Hello, little one," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "We've been waiting for you." Samuel peered over her shoulder, his expression a mixture of awe and uncertainty. "She's so small," he whispered. "Is she supposed to be that small?" "She's perfect," Zach assured him, his own eyes suspiciously bright as he looked at his family, his wife, his son by choice, and now his daughter by blood. "Just exactly the size she should be." They named her Elizabeth Rose York, after both of their mothers, though Samuel immediately christened her Ellie, and the nickname stuck. She was a peaceful baby with Zach's blue eyes and a dusting of dark hair that promised to be the same rich brown as Theodora's. The blizzard that had isolated them during her birth became part of family lore, a story that would be told and retold over the years, how Ellie York had come into the world during the worst storm in a decade, delivered by her father's steady hands, with her uncle standing guard. As spring returned to the Wyoming territory, bringing with it new growth and renewal, the York family settled into their expanded identity. Zach proved as natural a father to his infant daughter as he had to his adopted son, his large hands surprisingly gentle as he cradled Ellie against his chest or changed her tiny garments. Samuel took his role as uncle very seriously, reading to his niece from his school books and solemnly explaining the workings of the ranch, even though she was far too young to understand. His protective nature found a new focus in the tiny girl, and he appointed himself her special guardian, a role that would continue throughout their lives. On a warm May afternoon, when Ellie was 4 months old, Theodora sat on the porch of their home, watching as Zach taught Samuel how to guide a young colt on a lead rope. The baby slept peacefully in her lap, her small face relaxed in the innocent slumber of infancy. Looking out across the land that had once seemed only a burden of responsibility, Theodora felt a profound sense of gratitude. What had begun as tragedy, a little boy falling down a well, a young woman facing the prospect of losing her only family, had transformed into something beautiful beyond her imagining. The cowboy who had climbed down and carried Samuel to safety that day had given her far more than her brother's life. He had given her a partnership that had blossomed into deep and abiding love, a family expanded by choice and by blood, and a future filled with promise. As if sensing her thoughts, Zach looked up from his work with Samuel and the colt, his eyes finding hers across the yard. The smile they exchanged needed no words to accompany it, a silent affirmation of the life they had built together and would continue to build, day by day, season by season, year by year, on this land that had witnessed their beginning and would nurture their future. In that moment, with her daughter warm against her chest and the man she loved smiling at her from across the yard, Theodora knew with absolute certainty that sometimes the most unexpected turns in life's path could lead to the most perfect destinations. And that love, when found in the most unlikely circumstances, could transform even the harshest frontier into a true home.